Wheat. It's a huge part of our global food supply, but it is facing this growing, kind of invisible threat. So today, we're going to break down a really fascinating study that found a simple and seriously low-cost way for this essential crop to fight back. Let's jump in. So this is the big question we're tackling, and it's not just some academic thing. The answer has some pretty major consequences for farmers, and really for all of us. The threat is something called soil salinity, and it's a way bigger problem than you might think. All right, first up, let's meet the villain of our story, salt. And no, not the kind you put on your fries, but the kind that is quietly building up in our farmland, putting crops like wheat in some serious jeopardy. And according to the research we're diving into, this is no small problem. It's actually a massive roadblock for crop yields all over the world, especially in dry places where water is already an issue. So how big of a problem are we talking about? Well, get this. That 1 to 2%, that's the amount of irrigated farmland that becomes basically useless because of high salt levels every single year. It's this slow-moving crisis that's taking good land off the map. Okay, so what is all this salt actually doing to the plants? Well, in healthy soil, the roots just soak up water and nutrients, no problem. But in salty soil, the salt creates something called osmotic pressure. It basically makes it way harder for the plant to drink the water it needs. On top of that, the salt itself can be toxic, which stunts the plant's growth and just crushes the harvest. So with this salty threat getting worse, scientists started asking a really cool question. What if, instead of trying to fix miles and miles of soil, we could just make the plant tougher? You know, could we give the seeds a kind of training program to get them ready for a stressful life? And the technique they looked at is called hormonal seed priming. The whole idea is to pre-treat seeds with plant hormones that already exist in nature. This basically wakes up their built-in stress response systems ahead of time. Honestly, the best way to think about it, it's like giving the seed a vaccine so it builds up immunity before it ever gets sick. And you might think this is some super complicated lab process, but check out how simple it is. The researchers just soaked the wheat seeds in a hormone solution for about 6 hours. Then they carefully dried them out again. And that's it. The trained seeds were ready to be planted just like any other seed. So what hormones did they use? They picked 3 major players that are known to be involved in how plants grow and defend themselves. You can think of these as the 3 champions competing to see which one could best prep the wheat for the salty fight to come. Okay, so you've trained the seeds, but does it actually work? I mean, a training program is only as good as the results, right? So the next step for the researchers was to set up a really tough experiment, a salty stress test, to see if all this priming actually made a difference. So they did the whole experiment in a greenhouse, and they used what's called a completely randomized design. Now, that's just a sciencey way of saying they made sure everything was mixed up so the results would be totally reliable and not just because one plant got a sunnier spot. They set up 5 distinct groups. First, a healthy control group, no salt stress at all. Then a group that got the salty water but with 0 priming. And finally, 3 more groups, all getting the salt stress, but each one primed with one of the 3 different hormones. This setup is perfect because you can directly see what the salt does and then see exactly how well each hormone helped the plants fight back. All right, the stage is set, the test is done, now for the big reveal, the results. How did these plants actually do under all that pressure? Well, the data paints a very clear picture. So let's start with the baseline. This chart shows the plant's dry weight, which is a great way to measure growth. The healthy plants, the control group, they clocked in at 7.6 grams. But the plants in the salty soil with no treatment, only 5.8 grams. That's a 24% drop in their total mass just from the salt alone. That's a huge hit. But then, look what happens when we add one of the primed groups into the mix. The plants that were treated with salicylic acid, or SA, they had an average of 6.8 grams, even in that exact same salty soil. They clawed back almost all of the growth they'd lost to the salt. They got incredibly close to the healthy plants. And if the numbers don't convince you, the pictures really don't lie. This is the wheat ear. This is the part we actually eat. At the very bottom, that's the healthy plant. Now look at the one just above it, the one stressed by salt. It's obviously smaller, right? But then look at the very top one. That's the one primed with salicylic acid. It's almost identical to the healthy one. That's the power of just soaking the seed beforehand. So that visual evidence is pretty powerful, but the study went even deeper to figure out which of the hormones was the real MVP. And while all three of them helped a bit, one of them was just a clear champion. To figure it out, the researchers used something called a stress index for the grain weight, which is the most important part, right? For this, a lower score is better. It means the plant was less stressed. So IAA and GA3 helped, landing around 0.24. But salicylic acid, SA, it scored a remarkable 0.091. I mean, it wasn't even close. So yeah, the takeaway from this is just crystal clear. When you look at all the different measurements, especially protecting the final harvest, salicylic acid was hands down the best priming agent in the experiment. So why was it so good? Well, the study found it helped out on a bunch of different fronts. It protected the plant's chlorophyll, which kept its energy-making engine, photosynthesis, running smoothly. That in turn restored the plant's growth and led to bigger, better grains. Basically, it let the stressed plant act almost like it wasn't stressed at all. Now, this is more than just a core result from a lab. What these scientists found could have some really big implications for the future of farming in the real world. Okay, this chart looks a little intense, I know, but what it's showing us is actually super simple. It's mapping out how similar all the different groups were to each other. Just find the C, that's the healthy control group. Now find SPSA. See how it's the closest dot to the control? This just confirms from a different angle that the SA prime plants were the most like the healthy, unstressed plants. And that really brings us to the conclusion from the researchers themselves. They said, and I'm quoting here, that they recommend this as a simple, low-cost, and easily adoptable intervention for growing wheat in salty soils. This isn't some pie-in-the-sky expensive fix. It's a tool that farmers could potentially use right now. Which leaves us with this one last, really powerful question to think about. You know, in a world that's facing all these huge, complex problems, we often go looking for equally complex solutions. But what this study shows is that sometimes the best answers are actually pretty simple, inspired by the very systems we're trying to help. Could tapping into these natural defenses be the key to a safer, more secure food future for everyone?